Boa noite a todos que nos acompanham hoje no canal do YouTube do BTG Pactual Digital. Para mim é uma honra hoje ter aqui a companhia do meu amigo Patrice Etlin, sócio da Advent International.
Good evening, everyone
Vamos falar pouco de
who
Brasil,
follow
de
us
América
on
Latina,
the
de private
BTG
equity,
Pactual
setor
YouTube
real,
channel.
de como é que
It's
tá
an
trabalhando
honor
atualmente.
today
Então, Patrice,
to
antes
have
de
the
mais
company
nada,
of
bem-vindo.
my
Obrigado por ter
friend
aceitado o
Patrice
nosso convite. É
Etlin,
uma honra tê-lo
a
aqui.
partner at Advent International. We're going to talk about Latin America, private equity, real sector, investments, etc. So welcome, Patrice,
Patrice,
and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. It's an honor to have you here.
Concession, né? Foi dos sócios mais jovens, se não o sócio.
Good evening, Sallouti. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Patrice, you opened the Advent office in 97, and probably you were one of the youngest or the youngest partner at Advent.
Todo mundo conhece, tenho certeza que conhece as empresas que vocês
For our spectators,
talvez nem todos saibam.
could you share a bit about Advent, what you have done over these almost 20 years in the Latin American and Brazilian market? I'm sure everyone knows the companies that you have invested in, but maybe not everyone knows what's behind all these companies and that you've been behind all these companies. Advent is today one of the largest private equity funds in the world, investing around the world with two very large programs. We have the global program called GPE, called Global Private Equity, which invests mainly in the US, Europe, and also in Asia. And the last fund that was raised is a 17.6 billion US dollar fund, and we have an additional 2 billion invested only in technology. Our differential is that we have a program dedicated to Latin America, which is the program that I coordinate here from São Paulo, and this program started way back in 96. I opened the office in São Paulo in 97. I was a very young partner at the time. And from then on, we have raised 6 funds dedicated to Latin America. And we invested more than 6 billion US dollars here. And when I talk about Latin America, almost 2/3 of our investments are in Brazil. And we invested in around 50 companies, and we have emblematic cases like Croton in education, Citipe, Fleury Health, retail, Adolfi. So these are very strong sectors with us: retail, financial services, education, and health. And the investments you make are exclusively in this Latin American fund, or does it also have a pocket in the global fund? When we look at very large opportunities, recently, for example, we purchased Walmart here in Brazil, which is now called the Grupo Big. These were joint investments with the global fund. The regional fund put most of the funds, but the global fund also contributed. So we can have numbers around $50 million from the global, from the regional fund, and it can go up to 50 billion when I call upon the global fund to invest jointly with us. Along these 20 years, your track record is very positive. You mentioned that you're in your 6th fund, and I think all of them did very well. Over these 20 years, just like myself, you faced a lot of different crises. So how did you maintain such a good track record with such a great record in a country that has faced so many crises? The only thing I tell my investors is that they can be certain there will be volatility. Of course, it's always very complicated. To deliver performance within this volatility is complex in the long term and also in US dollars because we have foreign investors with us. We have a characteristic of being very conservative and very analytical. When I say analytical, we're very disciplined regarding valuation. Our entry values are very carefully set, and we change everything in a company that we invest in, the products, the market, the name. We did this with Big at Walmart, and the only thing that we cannot change is the price that we paid for it. So this is why we're very disciplined, and we're paid to make one or two decisions, which are large investment decisions. And to do this, we need to pull back from all the noise around us due to the great volatility. And this noise can be the exuberance and the optimism that we saw in 2011, 2012 at the peak of Brazil exiting the crisis, and then we bought very little and sold a lot. But we can have a great crisis situation like the peak of the crisis of the Dilma years when we invested in the Fleury group. So this discipline is very important. We have a low level of leverage in our companies, and the net indebtedness is around 6 times EBITDA. And this allows us to surf moments like this by preserving our cash. And we never mismatch currencies between the indebtedness and our revenue. So I never place indebtedness in dollars or revenue in dollars over an indebtedness in reais. And we're always very present in the management of the companies in the sectors that we know. So we have a lot of sector expertise. We act by means of committees and councils. We never enter the board of the company, and we always try to generate a lot of value. We have one sole objective: to maximize the results of the company. For those watching us, so low leverage, without mismatch of currencies, and sector expertise to contribute with management. That's it. Very simple and straightforward, right? 23 years working at this, by the way. So you just have to do it, right? Okay. Of all these crises that we faced over the last 20 years, this crisis now, how is it similar or different from all these other crises that we have faced over the years? Okay. It is different, obviously, because we're living a global crisis unheard of, and all countries are being affected to a greater or lesser extent. And everybody's on the same boat here. And it's very different from the crisis that we have crossed at the end of the 90s, then the crisis in 99 here in Brazil. So the problem was with the emerging economies, right? We always had someone who was throwing buoy. And we always had the same crisis with the emerging countries. And these were the years in which I started with Advent back in the day. So it is different in this sense. We have demand and supply occurring at the same time. This is very characteristic. And the similarities, it's very similar to the end of the 1990s and the Dilma years. This is hurting us in a very strong way. And the real economy, different from the 2008-2009 crisis or the Lula crisis at the end of 2002 with the Lula election. These are momentary crises. So it wasn't a real sector crisis, right? Now we are in the real sector. And this is different from the Dilma years, where we entered the recession in a more gradual way. This here was very abrupt. Mid-March, the guillotine just slammed down, and we were in this crisis situation that we are facing right now. So I see a much slower exit from this crisis than we saw in the past, and it will return based on consumers feeling safe. I think this is key here. There is always a tendency in humans to go back to normal, to try to pull out of this crisis situation and go to the streets and consume. And until we don't have this feeling of security, this will not happen as we bounced out of the other crises. So this gives us a longer horizon. We will have a vaccine down the road, some form of treatment. The population will develop antibodies. So anyway, we need all of this to happen so that things fall back into place. Patrice, as you mentioned, this was a very sudden crisis, despite occurring in China since December. The S&P did all the hype on February 18th. Everybody thought this was something peculiar to China, then it went to Europe, and it wouldn't affect the world. You, as a portfolio manager, how do you coordinate with the companies? Of course, we're going to talk about each one specifically later, but as a group, what did you do to react to this crisis? So, what measures did you take at the companies at large? Okay. We have the benefit of being a global fund and facing exactly what you just mentioned. We had portfolios in China being affected there back in January. We did our first survey of how this crisis could affect the global portfolio in January, as a matter of fact. And in February, in our Latin American portfolio, specifically for Brazil, we started our first initiatives for cash by managing working capital. We froze capex and headcount, and we started sharing our best practices from our Chinese portfolio. In March, we plunged into the crisis and we implemented crisis committees and cash measures, and we entered the war room mode. So I have some interesting data that I can share about this. Well, let's talk about which companies of the portfolio felt this the most. You mentioned you have investments in retail, tourism, education, financial services. So which companies felt this the most in your portfolio? At the start, we classified our companies as a high, mid, and low impact. At the high impact, of course, we had the retail companies right off the bat. So we have investors in mobile phones and supermarkets. We have the franchise of all Samsung stores in the main capitals of the country, and they were shut down overnight. And they're mainly located in shopping malls, and all our clothing stores like Lely, Bobo, John John, Dalil, they were all closed in malls. And in the beginning, our construction material stores and lighting fixture stores, they were also all shut down. And also auto parts retail with Fortebras. We have consolidated in this market. Most of the stores were impacted. We also have a very nice operation, which is the concession of national parks. We operate Foz do Iguaçu, Paineiras in Rio de Janeiro, and also Fernando de Noronha. the federal government decided to close down all national parks. So all of these companies went to zero revenue as of the second or third week of March. Looking now at the situation, Cataratas and the other national parks are all closed down, but we saw in Quero Quero and Fortebras them bouncing back. The stores started reopening, construction material and auto parts were considered as essential retailing, and here we have some interesting trends. Construction material is going back to a stability level, a little bit below last year, but with very consistent results. And in Eletro, when Sul reopened Eletro, we saw the champagne effect, so to speak. We saw sales records. So we had a bottlenecked demand. And at Fortebras, we saw a lot of heavy vehicle demand, always constant, but smaller vehicles dropped, mainly in the south and southeast regions of Brazil. And in the north and northeast, the smaller car parts, they kept constant. We also saw digital just exploding, both at Quero Quero, Fortebras, Alide. This represented about 20-25% of our sales, which was not the case before that. But this is something interesting. You're saying that some that closed and came back, they came back basically to the previous level. Some made up for it, and some of them grew in digital. So much better than anybody before the crisis would imagine, right? Okay, I'm reporting the effect of the last few days, literally, because we're following this on an hourly basis. So we have this champagne effect of this reopening or this debottlenecking, and let's see now how this plays out. All the issues of isolation, of social distancing within the stores, restricting the number of consumers, sanitation issues. So this is a very complex operation. We're starting to adjust to this scenario where we have already opened. In these essential product stores, we have an empirical theory that the people who did not lose their jobs, public servants, large company employees, retirees, they have more available income because they're not spending with travel and other things that they used to spend before. Do you think this has to do with this movement, or you cannot pinpoint this exactly? No, we can't pinpoint. You mentioned the retirees. We have a great concern with this risk group, both with regard to our employees and our customers. We will talk about Big as well. We have Sam's Club from Big. The members of younger families, you have the purchasing club. So members over age 60, we don't want them going to the store. So someone who is of the family and is a relative can buy at our stores without being a member. So I think it's still difficult to really see what you're mentioning. Let's talk now about the companies that felt the impact the least. Big is an interesting example due to its size. We're present throughout Brazil, and we have very significant turnover levels. Big continued operating throughout. It was considered essential retail. And since the beginning, we had all this issue with the complexity of the operation due to store sanitation, cart sanitation, social distancing, the being strongly at the radar of the public health agencies and all these standards that came about, and we have been selling above our budget. So inventory was quite an issue at the beginning of the quarantine, but it was interesting that we maintained these high levels even during the quarantine, and mainly in the hypermarkets. We have different formats. We have the convenience store, and the hyper supermarkets, which was a format that was dropping. It's now performing very well during the pandemic. We see high tickets, lower volumes, and people, they want to really stock up. High tickets, but with less clients in the stores. Consumers, they feel safer in the hyper because we have a larger store footprint. We can better do the social distancing. We have a greater variety. So consumers, they know they will find what they want, different from going to the local supermarket. So the wholesale resale format, which has grown strongly in the country, is suffering a lot more due to the wholesale side of the business. Small businesses that who are our clients, they dropped significantly in numbers. Of course, they are feeling on their end of the business. Convenience stores, the neighborhood stores have grown significantly. So that quick purchase, that enter and exit the store very quickly, has been occurring, and also what we mentioned about digital. So we have partnerships with Corner Shop and iFood, and some of our stores are selling 20% through digital, which was not the case before this. What is interesting and big as well is that we have more than 5,000 positions open for new hirings, and absenteeism is very high at our stores. In other words, our employees are concerned about going to the stores, so they're presenting high rates of absenteeism. So this has affected our stores, and we have not been able to fill these positions. So despite all of this, we still are keeping 5,000 stores open. Very interesting. It's quite a surprise. It's fair to say that Big in your portfolio has had the best performance. No, there's another one that is very close to you, which is EasyVest. It's our online broker. It is operating 30% above budget, and we have net 30% inflow of clients entering the platforming and placing resources, and many are going to variable income. These are retail clients. It's the same phenomenon that we are observing in digital. This is an opportunity to allocate shares. It's really surprising the resilience of retail clients. The stock market has attracted a lot of people. This notion that the market is cheap is something difficult to measure, but this is the point. These clients, they are entering. The average clients, they have around 50, 60,000 reais, and they are operating in variable income. So this is really surprising, quite a phenomenon. The theory that we have already debated is that we agree that Brazil has an interest rate that is in line with global levels, and savings accounts will have to migrate. And empirically, I think this is migrating. And I think this is an excellent piece of information for the capitals market. We're also living a very intense moment with our Indux fund, which is our former Estácio. This is the second largest educational group in the country, strongly present in universities, mainly in the state of Rio. This is a very well capitalized company that has open capital and really excellent track record. This was fundamental. The challenge that we had in operational terms was huge. Overnight, we had to move over 300,000 presential students to e learning. So, this is not traditional e learning where you have a recorded lecture and you're simply broadcasting this. No, teachers are teaching virtually for hundreds of students at different homes. So there was a challenge of negotiating with Oi and Vivo to make available bandwidth at accessible prices. And we negotiated group contracts so that we could continue lecturing. There was a pedagogical challenge of teachers reinventing themselves and offering virtual classes. And these teachers were not used to this. They were only giving presential classes. So these were quite relevant challenges. And this will probably generate permanent effects. I don't think this will go on forever. But using technology for education and for online purchasing, you also have CNIT, which focuses on technology. I think this trend was accelerated by all this, maybe 5, 10 years. But certainly this was accelerated, for sure. Digital was already relevant, and now more so. And remote for all of us. We're working from home, and how can we be productive and extremely productive by doing so? So I think many work relations will change, and the relationship of companies with their clients will evolve to digital, as we are already observing. Here we joke that we refuse to rent more real estate for our office because we will have to accommodate by using more technology. I agree with you. Changing the focus from the specific companies, you mentioned that you had a lot of information sharing, you set up different committees. Can you elaborate a bit more on this? Which committees were formed, how you improved interactions, what were the main initiatives, and what were the lessons learned here for our viewers? As I commented, in March, we started the crisis committees involving cash and companies. So high and mid impact companies, we had daily meetings. Now we're holding weekly meetings. In the low impact, they were weekly, now they're monthly. And the first focus was to protect our employees. So move headquarters to remote locations while companies still had operations occurring at the ends. As already mentioned, afterwards, it was cash, cash, and cash. This is the blood of companies. So let's work on working capital and use a surgical view on receivables. This is a great concern at this time. Default, of course, is at an all-time high, both in B2C and B2B. We started heavily negotiating with suppliers, but this is all very delicate because you have supply chains. For example, at headstock in clothing, some suppliers depend fully on us. So you can't squeeze and postpone and kill your supplier. So these are very delicate case-by-case negotiations to extend terms, so slow-moving inventory. So you need aggressive pricing strategies to move your inventory. So more Coca-Cola and less Fanta, as we joke. And then we worked very strongly with taxes and working encumbrances. We centralized at 2 or 3 offices or law firms so that we could have a common legal view of our entire portfolio of all issues that were occurring. So the government was releasing in daily federal initiatives regarding fiscal and taxes. So we needed a sounding board that was common, and we would then pass this on to our entire portfolio as a whole. And we have used these initiatives that were very welcome from the government, mainly in the labor sphere, to compensate working contracts. So the first 3 weeks were very busy. And now, step by step, we are normalizing our work pace. Patrice, how has this crisis changed how you look at your investments and your portfolio? What will you do down the road? Probably the add-ons will focus more on the align. So what does this crisis change your current portfolio, and what are you looking at? As I mentioned, Sallouti, slowly but surely we are changing the status of the war room, and we are shifting this to a win room. We have an agenda in our portfolio that is still not on the highly impacted, but on the mid and low impacts. And we're starting to look beyond the crisis. So where are the opportunities of large market shares, both for organic and other opportunities? And there are some interesting opportunities within our sectors so that we can see procurement on a point-by-point case. So how can we retain these new digital clients? So these clients that before were not in our digital channels, how can they remain with us? How can we offer new services, new products? So this is a very important agenda in our portfolio. And there's also a very interesting thing here, which is talents. Any crisis opens the opportunity to attract talents to your company that were not so accessible before. We were always very present in the market with a talent bench for executives, and we have increased our interaction with this network. In the end, every crisis generates opportunities. I loved your saying, leave the war room and enter the win room. That was great. Changing our focus now, we were fortunate to do a joint project at HC. We worked in the União São Paulo project, and I think Advent has had a posture of social and entrepreneurial responsibility that is impeccable. You have done so much that we should have a 2 minute of inspiration for people to retribute what you have done. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about. We created the Advent Relief Fund at a global level. We placed 25 million in funds from the partners, and we brought 8 million reais to Brazil, and we're focusing very strongly on social. We're the largest donor of União São Paulo, and together with you, we are the largest donor in União Rio, and we are feeding 100 families for a month. So this is really a beautiful project. At Quero Quero in the south, we have a very large initiative together with our employees and the company cash flow. We are matching all the funds they raise to benefit 20,000 families in the south. And now we're launching a campaign to double this using our Quero Quero clients. And we're also doing this by means of media channels in the south. This initiative at HC, together with you, it's very nice. At the Hospital das Clínicas, we are contracting more than 3,000 shifts. at their hospital. So this is very nice. So we have many initiatives. For example, at Cataratas, even though it is closed, we are supporting 5,000 families around the parks. Edux, together with Unleavened, we launched Resolve Sim. We do Resolve together with the public schools so that students can prepare for the scholastic aptitude tests. So many, many initiatives. It's a very important agenda, and my team is strongly involved in initiatives like this. Excellent. Very similar to what we are doing is that we are able to leverage movements that had already funds, and now we're really potentializing the efforts of society. This mobilization is really incredible. The mobilization of individuals, companies. I hope this is the legacy this crisis leaves behind. But on the downside, maybe we'll see the nationalisms growing. The big government also. I hope these extraordinary measures are, as the term implies, extraordinary and not permanent. We have already lived this a few times, and I hope we leave this behind us. Just to wrap up, to stick to the time that we agreed upon. Do you still have capital to invest, Patrice? You have your funds. Are you able to raise other funds? What are you looking at ahead? What about new investments? Is it too early to talk about this? Now that you left the war room and moved into the wind room, in terms of funds, what do you see? I'm still entering the wind room, so I'm not there yet. We still have a huge amount of work with our portfolio. Of course, this is our priority right now. But when we look in this concept of a wind room and looking at the opportunity of apportioning more funds to leverage this positive portfolio, we're looking at this very carefully at very positive situations, but looking outside. We're starting to spend some time in the sectors and with companies that we know very well. You know how difficult it is to start a due diligence process in a moment like this and setting the fair value on any asset without penalizing the asset too significantly. And you may have some growth hypotheses that may be very difficult to put on paper. We see some opportunities in public companies. Maybe this flight to quality concept is very present, but we're looking at all of this in a very cautious fashion. It's still a moment of great uncertainties, and we have daily indications for our portfolio, but it's still too early to do a yearly projection on our portfolio. So this is the mindset that we are at right now. Even though we have significant resources available right now, and with this exchange rate, we have 25% more resources in reais to invest. Knowing you, we joke that soon you will seize this opportunity to make new investments. You're probably trying to hide something here, but we know that soon you're going to be making new investments. Well, I hope so, really. I think that's it, Patrice. On our behalf, I would like to thank you for your partnership, for our friendship. We have worked for many years together, and you're really a great partner. I'd like to thank you for your trust, and thank you so much for sharing these words with us and sharing a little bit about Advent and learning how you manage your portfolio companies and how you think in terms of investments. And would you like to give us a closing statement? Sallouti, I would like to thank you. We have walked side by side for a long time, both with the bank and legally. And it's what I said. The financial market, investors, advisors, we have a role here. The financial market and banks during 2008, 2009 were under scrutiny all the time, but this is not the case right now. We as investors, you as credit providers, I think we have the role of lubricating the gears now. We need to be part of the solution right now, right? For sure, we are part of the solution. And I think we have to be very pragmatic and work hand in hand so that everyone can pull out of this together. It's a very complex and dramatic situation, but we are living the local bubble, and we're trying to equate this with what is happening all around us in a very solidary way. All of us have a role, whether at a legal sphere or physical sphere, and we're working together to find the solutions. Patrice, congratulations for your work, for your professional work, for your brilliant career, and thank you once again for accepting our invitation. And for all who are listening, thank you very much, and we will see you next week. Thank you, and good night to all.